Hey everyone, I'm Christoph. I'm an engineering manager at Facebook London, and I work on a team with a team that is responsible for building high-quality JavaScript tools. We learned that we need to continuously invest in making the developer experience delightful. I should probably catch up with my slides back here. Good. So today I'd like to show you how we applied a product mindset to turn a tool into a product. And the example that I'm going to give you is Jest, the JavaScript testing framework that aims to make testing painless. But unfortunately, it wasn't always quite as painless as we wanted it to be. Just a quick question. Who here has heard of Jest? OK, that's cool. That's pretty much everyone. Who is using Jest? OK, cool. For those of you who haven't heard it, I'll try to convince you that Jest is a good thing. And for everybody who is already using it, I'll try to make you more excited to write even more tests. So unfortunately, testing with Jest wasn't quite as painless as we wanted it to be. And the story has some dark moments. You know, the Jest project had fallen into disrepair, and it wasn't winning anyone over in open source. This is an actual tweet about Jest from about 2 years ago. And I'm not making this up. This is not something you ever want to hear about a project. We knew we had some work to do. And internally at Facebook, it wasn't much different. Jest worked OK as a tool to test JavaScript applications. But here's the thing. In this photo, you can see this party going on in the background, and everybody's having a good time. But this Jester is sitting there, and he's just so gloomy and sad. And this is literally the experience that people had when they were writing JavaScript tests at Facebook. There were all these people that were having fun writing JavaScript applications with React, but then we realized nobody was actually writing any tests, and people were questioning their life decisions. So I'll tell you how we turned that sad Jester into a happy one. And at first, you might ask yourself, do we even need a test framework? Like we realized, Jest isn't great, but maybe it's OK that way. Maybe it doesn't need to be great. Maybe we don't need testing at all, right? But then, of course, testing is an important part of the engineering process. We observed a significant difference in how people write code with and without a test framework. And we learned that Jest is only useful if it's actually a great product, And testing also significantly influences engineering behavior. So when we go on to try to improve testing, we need to look at it from two angles. One of them is the experience of running tests, and the other one is the experience of writing tests. So for running, I want results as fast as possible. I want to know if tests are failing instantly. For writing tests, I want great testing APIs to be available to me, and then I also want to have great documentation to get better at testing and to learn how to test my applications. So as we develop these requirements, we can look at it as we would for any other product, right? And for Jest, if we look at it as a product, there are three main features: performance, features, and adaptability. And all three of these are important, and we need to fulfill them equally to make a great product. For example, if we're building the fastest test runner out there, but it doesn't have any features, then nobody's going to adopt it. But also, if we're building the best features into a test runner, but it's really slow, people will probably not use it, hack around it, or use something else, which is not what we want. And then finally, if you build the greatest test runner of all, but nobody's using it, then there's no point to it. So if we peel back this product layer that I've been talking about a little bit and look at emoji hiding behind those, this was actually really hard as an engineer. We had a project that wasn't great, and we weren't sure what to do with it. And I kind of came up with these three stages that we went through to make this project great. It's fix, rewrites, and polish. That's FRP, not functional programming, functional reactive programming. It's fix, rewrites, and polish. And I'll tell you what that means by going into the first product feature that I talked about, performance. Performance at scale is really the #1 feature. At Facebook, we had thousands of existing test files and tens of thousands of tests. And we couldn't just move over to something else. And we realized our test runner was not good. So your instinct normally tells you, OK, our test runner is bad, so let's just create a new one, and then just adopt that one. But then because we had so many existing tests, we couldn't just swap it out with something else. And also from past experience, we learned that big rewrites often take significantly longer than anticipated, and sometimes they don't even ship at all. So we decided it's better to improve our testing infrastructure incrementally by making big rewrites across the entire system in place. So that means rewriting different modules inside of Jest piece by piece and moving the entire code base along with it. And I want to stress that quite often it's enough to make 1% improvements over time. If you continuously make 1% performance improvements day over day, week over week, you actually get really fast at the end. Here's a part of the system that we rewrote where it really helped. Internally at Facebook, we have thousands of test files and tens of thousands of JavaScript modules. So we rewrote this system that keeps track of dependencies. So for example, what Jest has to do, it actually has to analyze the entire file system, read the files that we care about, mostly JavaScript files, and then figure out metadata, like which file depends on which other file. For example, also when you change a file in Jest, it actually knows which files depend on each other. So if I change the store file, it will know which test to run, to always only run the minimum amount of tests because running all of them is not fast enough usually. We also rewrote how Jest distributes work to worker processes. So it runs tests in parallel across multiple CPUs. And we do that by actually keeping track of how fast tests are, and then on the next run, using that data to optimize the test run and schedule it better. And then, as I said, there were many small improvements over time. These ranged from changing how we cache transformed files, to improving our module resolution algorithm that we use at Facebook, and to upgrading third-party libraries that were simply outdated because we hadn't worked on the project for a while. All right, so now that performance is in a good state, we also need to look at features. So about features, I want to go into three features that I really want to highlight today. But there are actually dozens of features that Jest comes with out of the box that you can take a look at on the website. There's so much that it's really hard to talk about all of it. So the first one is how we improved the output of Jest. Then we're going to talk about the immersive watch mode that really sucks you into Jest and gave it a new identity. And then we're also going to take a quick look at snapshots. So let's start talking about the improved output. This is what Jest used to look like. There were stack traces that didn't matter, log messages all over that you couldn't even find them. And there's this failing assertion where you're trying to compare two objects, and it just, Jest doesn't help you solve those problems. Compare that to what Jest looks like right now. We didn't just rewrite the entire assertion library to be more powerful. We applied a product mindset to figure out what do users need when tests are failing? What do they need to see? What is the signal that they want so that they can actually fix those tests quickly? So for example, we color code the differences there. And then we also print a diff between objects, so it's a lot easier to figure out what's wrong. The cool thing is also that this gave Jest a new identity, because now when you're seeing a screenshot of a test runner, you instantly know that it's Jest. We also have this really great concurrent runner that shows you exactly what's going on right now, which test it's running. It shows you a summary of what's happening on the bottom, and all these other cool things. There's the immersive watch mode. Here's what that looks like. Just runs tests really quickly, then shows you a summary, and then tells you what you can do with it. Just quickly again, let's go into this. Here's how you start up Jest. Runs a couple of tests, and then when you hit P for pattern mode, it actually gives you this type ahead right in your terminal where you can select exactly the tests that you want to run. With the latest release of Jest, we even added arrow key support, so you can actually go down and pick the one test that you want to run. This is the CLI. This tool is incredibly interactive, and it's awesome. And then finally, I want to talk about snapshots. Have you ever written a test like this, where you don't actually know what's going to go there on the right-hand side? You're trying to compare two objects, and you're like, well, I don't know what my code is doing. So in that case, we do what we always do, right? We comment out that piece of code, and then log the output. And then we take that, and we just paste it back into our test, and we're like, done. Judging from all the reactions, I'm confident that I'm not alone in this, right? So we created an assertion called toMatchSnapshot to make this easier, because we realized that a lot of people weren't even interested in doing this kind of simple regression testing, really. So I'll show you how that works. The first time you run this assertion with Jest, it actually just records the value that your code produces, and it stores it in a snapshot file. And then for every subsequent test run, it actually compares that value from the snapshot with what your code is producing. In this example, we're changing a React component to link from facebook.com to instagram.com, and then it's up to us to decide whether this is an intentional change or not. So Jest will tell you, hey, please update your snapshots with the update snapshot flag, or go and fix your code. All right, and you might be like, wait, what? That's not testing. What are you telling me? You know, this doesn't make any sense. So we realized that it's much better to run code before it hits production, right? That seems kind of obvious. And this is a really easy way to get started with adding test coverage to your code base with not a lot of hassle. The reason why snapshots are so good is that they're not a replacement for conventional testing. They're not replacing the other dozens of assertions that are part of Jest. The difference is not between snapshots or other assertions. The difference is between snapshots and no tests at all. And we found that a lot of people get a lot of value out of these snapshots. For example, the Prettier project, the project that is used to format JavaScript code, I'm confident that it wouldn't have been able to be developed so quickly if it weren't for snapshots. But, you know, because I told you now that Jest is a great runner, you know, it can do everything. It's kind of like this guy in this photo, this Jester, he can just do whatever. But that brings me to an announcement. I want to talk about one more feature that's actually really cool, but also quite unimpressive in the end. So, you know, have you ever had to, you know, work on 2 JavaScript projects at a time and it's really hard to juggle them, right? So, for example, say you have a Node.js backend and a React frontend. Or say you work at Facebook and you're trying to debug an issue in React and Relay and you're running 2 test suites at the same time. Or you're having an even worse day, you're running 4 test runners, it doesn't even fit into your terminal. It's terrible, right? Like, that's just not a good experience. So it's pretty easy. We taught Jest how to juggle, and we call that the multi-project runner. And that leads me to this unimpressive demo. In the latest version of Jest, when you start it up with this -- project flag, you just pass in a number of projects like folders or configurations for your test run or whatever. It's actually the same Jest as you always see. It's just one single instance of Jest running on 4 projects at the same time. You can watch as many projects as you like. It watches for changes in any of those projects and runs the minimum amount of tests that it needs to. Here you can filter tests across all these projects. You can pick exactly what you want to run. For example, here we're deciding that we actually want to run all the Relay and the React tests, and we're running them all in one single instance. So this is a really great thing. Cool. Oh, thanks. We're only halfway through the talk, so I have a bunch more things that I want to talk about, if you don't mind. Finally, about features, I do want to say that the experience should be delightful. And this sounds really odd because, you know, we're talking about a test framework here, and a lot of times you're just like, man, yeah, test framework, that doesn't really matter. But we realized that, you know, only if the experience of writing tests is great, people will actually write more tests. And it's kind of obvious because you don't want to fight with your test framework all the time, right? Because that will just end up you not using it at all and not writing tests and then having breakages in production that you could have stopped otherwise. So that leads me to the 3rd pillar, adoptability. Because we spent all this time, you know, working on Jest, so we just really want you guys to give it a try. So how do you do that? The great thing is that we turned it into a 0 configuration test platform. It has a lot of great features out of the box. All you need to do is install it with Yarn, and you're good to go. Then you can start writing your test. This is just a simple example to sum up 2 numbers. And then you can run it. And in most cases, we don't have to set anything up for anything. It just picks up your Babel config or whatever you're using. It also works great with TypeScript. That requires a small amount of configuration. In this case, we're also generating code coverage, which is fully integrated into Jest. We also managed to ship Jest together with React Native and Create React App. So if you're using one of these 2 projects, it actually ships with a complete test setup out of the box, something that we weren't able to do before. This is really great to create some sort of cohesion across these tools. So you actually don't just get React, you actually get all the tools you need to build a successful app. Which leads me to another feature that we built. So Yarn, you might have heard of it. It's the JavaScript dependency manager. And Yarn is also being worked on by the JavaScript tools team in London. We added this simple command that's actually really powerful. In the latest version of Yarn, you can, if you want to get started with a new React app, a new Next app, a new React Native app, or any new app that you want to build, you just type Yarn, create that app, and it will just work. You don't need to worry about where you put your global CLIs anymore and how to keep them up to date. You can just use Yarn create. It's really awesome. So those low friction ways to get started, they're great. And maybe your next project, you'll start with Jest, right? And that's cool. But that's not good enough for existing projects, you know? So when you look at this project called Jest, you know, ideally it should be modular, and you should find things inside of it that also make sense individually that you can adopt in your big code bases. And not long ago, Jest was just one big repository on GitHub, and it didn't have much internal structure, so it wasn't really modular. So we just simply turned it into one big modular repository, and we introduced structure. This was actually really hard. We're talking about pulling Jest apart from one gigantic module into a multi-project repository that has currently about 30 different modules. So the great thing is that all these Jest packages and turning Jest into this platform actually helps us adopt Jest in other places. Sometimes they don't even have anything to do with testing. So for example, at Facebook, there's this project called a Jest taste map, which allows you to use our own custom module resolution algorithm. And that package is now used in many other projects. For example, React Native's Packager, it's used at Instagram and for some of our internal ESLint plugins. But then Jest Snapshots, for example, that is used in another test framework, but also used by UI development environments that you might have heard about, like Storybook and StyleGuidist. And then Jest Validate, that is a really cool, tiny little project that helps you make it easier to configure JavaScript tools. I'll show you what that looks like. You know, have you ever tried to configure a JavaScript tool and it just doesn't do what you want it to do and it's not helpful? So with Jest Validate, if you're building a JavaScript tool, you can just drop that in and it will just help you make it easier to set up your project. So for example, in this use case here, you have a typo in your configuration and you start up Jest and it will actually yell at you and tell you what the correct configuration is. I'm sure we can all agree that, you know, configuring JavaScript projects could be easier. And this is a module that helps you do that. So packages let us to consolidate infrastructure and to share best practices. This is a really good case where, you know, the sum of all the parts, Jest itself, is great, but the packages individually are also really, really good. And about sharing best practices, the way I see it is that the more we can standardize on how we test applications, the easier it will be for people to figure out how to write good tests. The great thing is that packages also make Jest more hackable. We were able to build a great open source community around Jest that is contributing to the Jest project itself. I'll show you an example. Consider the editor integration in VS Code. This shows you, gives you instant test feedback right in line. You just need to install it and it works. Best thing about this, we had no idea this was being worked on until it was already done, and it just works. People collaborated with us afterwards by contributing back all that code into an editor support package in Jest that can be used to integrate it with other IDEs. We were also able to add 2 new core contributors to the Jest project, Rogelio and Michal. There's an interesting takeaway here that, you know, we spent some amount of time trying to ramp up people on the code base who expressed their interest in contributing, but never actually contributed any code. And we wasted a lot of time on that. So we found that it's easier to find the people who are already contributing small things to a project and help them take on bigger tasks. That was a way more successful thing for us to do. I'll show you one more example of this. So you know, sometimes I have ideas, and I showed you this type ahead where you can select the tests in Jest, and I didn't have enough time to build that. So I just created a feature request on GitHub, and I said, man, you know, wouldn't it be great if we had that feature? And then one day, randomly, you know, I woke up and Rogelio came, and he literally on the PR, he said, I found this very interesting, so I built this. And this is like a very complex feature, you know, requires a lot of context around Jest. And then I come in and I'm like, man, this is awesome. We need to ship this. But to make this work at Facebook, we actually have to rewrite the whole thing. And then a couple days later, Rogelia actually came back, and he was like, cool, sure, you got this. I rewrote the watch mode. I wrote tests for the watch mode. Now it's awesome. It's instant. It's fast. And then as a result, Rogelio, he was at ReactConf 2 months ago to present the work that he has done on Jest, and has also talked about snapshots. And so did dozens of other people. There are now talks everywhere. I'm speaking here right now, for example. But there are talks by Jest contributors all over the world at conferences, at meetups. People are writing tutorials and books and guides and all that kind of stuff about testing. And finally, we actually have these conversations again about how we can make testing in JavaScript better. And I think there's also another talk later today about JavaScript end-to-end testing, which is awesome. So one more thing that's absolutely critical for adoption is great documentation. We're currently working on translating the Jest documentation to other languages. And for this, we need your help, help from the community. Currently, we released translations for Brazilian Portuguese and for Spanish. But there's a lot of other languages that don't have as much community contribution yet. So if you like the Jest project and you want to help out in a way, please go on the website. Please help us with translating the documentation. Thank you. I still have a bit more. Sorry about that. I'm not leaving yet. Sorry. It's still not good enough to get adoption. There's a project called JS Code Shift, which allows you to actually move from one project to another, or from one version of a library to a new one in almost no time across thousands of thousands of lines of code. And there's a project called Jest Code Mods. If you haven't heard about code mods and JS Code Shift and all that, I'll just give you a quick refresher. So say you have this kind of test, right? And you have thousands of test files that look like this. And JS Code Shift is a tool that can look at this code using the abstract syntax tree, similar to how we use it for compilers. But then it can transform this code into a different output and print it back the way that as if a person had written that. That kind of stuff becomes a little bit more, the printing part becomes a little bit more obsolete with Prettier, but it's still a powerful tool that we all use. So the best part of this story is that the Jest Code Mods project was entirely driven by the community, and we didn't even know that it was being built until it was already done. It was created, maintained, and shared by the community, and that's amazing. As a result, we went from only Facebook using Jest to more than 100 small and large companies that have adopted Jest in the last 6 months alone. And this is something that wasn't even possible before without code mods. And at Facebook, we also saw that over the last 6 months, people wrote 35% more tests than in any 6-month period before. It's twice the growth that we have measured compared to any 6-month period before even. So this leads me to believe that when we improve our testing experience, people will naturally start writing more tests. And as a result, we went from this painful JavaScript testing experience to something that is even more than just painless. Jest now provides a delightful JavaScript testing experience. It helps engineers. It gives them confidence when they're building software. And not only did we accomplish that, we also made JavaScript testing actually fun and exciting again. And just 2 weeks ago, we announced Jest 20, which came out with this multi-project runner. And it was the biggest Jest release that we have ever made, twice as big as the previous release, which was already the biggest release. So I'm pretty excited about the progress we're making on JavaScript testing. And then what you've seen today is that building tools is successful when you collaborate with the wider community around you. We knew that Jest wasn't great, and we learned it the hard way. We had to rebuild the whole thing. But then the best thing is that the best solutions often come from people in the community, people you don't work with every day. And the result is an empowered ecosystem and better tools for everybody. Thank you so much.